Hey there, my name is Dr. Theis, and I've been tasked this month with telling you guys why we hate the grocery store after we've had a traumatic brain injury. More often than not, it's actually more common to find this symptom in patients who've had a mild traumatic brain injury. We don't know why, so don't find me with questions yet. But it's really common, and the reason most often is because they have a visual or vestibular disorder. So let's take a step back and talk about how complicated of a visual vestibular task going to the grocery store actually is. It's often underestimated because in our day-to-day lives, we go to the store, we pick 5 or 10 items up, we put them in the basket, we go to checkout, and we don't think anything of it. But when we've had a brain injury, that task is incredibly difficult. And let's start out with talking about the vestibular ocular reflex. So how the ears and the eyes talk to each other. So the vestibular ocular reflex is actually the fastest reflex in your body, and it gets employed anytime that we move our eyes or our head at the same time. So for example, if I am looking at my camera and I'm moving my head side to side, technically my ears are sensing my head movement and telling my eyes to move in the opposite direction at the exact same speed so that I can maintain my vision on the camera. That is a really wonderful reflex. It happens seamlessly, but the eyes and the ears and the head all have to move within time perfectly in sync with each other. And if it's imperfect just a little bit, when we move our eyes and our head, we can get dizzy, nauseous, headache. And the problem with that is that it's one of the most common things that can happen to patients after they've had a concussion or a whiplash injury. We use this reflex for fight or flight, and therefore, the best way I can explain it to people is imagine that we're going to get out of the grocery store for a second. Let's imagine that you're in a park reading a book. So we're reading a book sitting on a park bench, and the book itself is in perfect vision. It's perfectly clear. We call that our central visual processing pathway. So I am centrally focused on the book, and I'm peripherally aware of my surroundings. So what that means is I'm not really paying attention to the rest of the park because I'm just reading a book, but I'm aware. So if something were to jump out at me, for example, while I'm sitting on this park bench, I'm going to move my central focus from the book to whatever jumped out on the side vision there. And when I move my eyes or my head, I'm either going to make a really fast saccade or I'm going to make a head movement, right? Which is that vestibular ocular reflex. So the vestibular ocular reflex is in actuality a pathway that's used for fight or flight. So when it gets off kilter, the brain does this funny thing where it says, hey, you know what? I can't react to my surroundings very well because I know when I move my head and my eyes quickly, I get dizzy and nauseous and I can't do it quickly enough. So I probably shouldn't ignore my peripheral vision. And so instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay attention to all of my vision, right? That central visual focus is going to expand. So we're paying attention to everything. So you can imagine if you're going to a grocery store that instead of now just looking for one item on a shelf, your brain is paying attention to every item on the shelf. And so something as simple as going to get the ketchup from the grocery store is now a monumental task. We also have to add in that there's a lot of cognitive tasks. So first of all, you have to remember where the grocery store is. Then you get into the grocery store. There's a ton of fluorescent lights, which are very triggering, and we'll get into that in another video. And then, of course, we have balance. We need to be able to walk around. Some people will use a cart actually for balance, is what they've told me in the office. And then you're walking. There's terrible music playing, so it's multisensory. You also have kids running around and screaming and people talking. And you have to remember why you're there, right? You have that 5-item list. I need milk, I need ketchup, I need eggs, right? You're going through the list in your head. So you have working memory going for you. If you're like me, you have a list because sometimes working memory goes out the door the second you walk into that grocery store. So you're walking down the grocery store, let's say we're looking for ketchup. Well, okay, we find the ketchup. So it's this, right? So first we have to find the aisle, get to the aisle. Then once we find that aisle, we have to visually search for ketchup. And if it's a very big store, there's multiple types of ketchup, right? Do you want the one that's sugar-free? Do you want the one that's on brand, off brand? Do you have a coupon? Do you want the big one? Do you want the small one? Is there a sale? And all of those itty bitty little cognitive tasks are using energy in the brain. So if you have a brain injury and your brain injury is already in this energy crisis trying to heal itself, something as simple as going to the grocery store is going to make you feel really anxious. And more often than not, it's not necessarily, definitely dizziness, nausea, headache with the task, but a lot of my patients end up telling me that they get anxious when they go to the grocery store. And it's more of a learned anxiety in the sense of it's a fight or flight response, right? So our system is paying attention to everything. It feels like it's in a threatening situation. And that's why we feel so panicky in the grocery store. And it's also why when we leave the grocery store, doing something that in our normal day-to-day lives is not a taxing job, we are exhausted. And that is why we hate the grocery store.